Hello. These podcasts are not reviews of the episodes. They're called Indefinable Magic, so yes, they are generally trying to put something positive or even enriching, but mostly I aspire to the lofty heights of mildly entertaining and no more out there. I hope they're pretty balanced. But they are not an exercise in this episode is good or this episode is bad. You can find that sort of thing anywhere. I'm trying to do something a little different, so if you could bear that in mind, I'd be grateful. Welcome to Indefinable Magic. Half-hour word salads tossed about in order to make a meal out of some of the ingredients that go into making the television programme that is indigestible to some, but pure ambrosia to others. Written and presented by me, Toby Haydock. In these bite-sized editions, I'll be trying to get to grips with one aspect of the latest episode of Doctor Who to see if I can say something interesting about it. Tonight's instalment of Indefinable Magic Bite Size, After Rogue, written by Kate Herron and Brian E. Redman, is called You've Had This Place Redecorated. You'll not sour my evening. Right, let's dispense with formalities. I'm moving to first base with, some might say, indecent haste. There was much I liked about Rogue. It started with our heroes in the thick of the action, no messing about. Captain Jack Hamilton was great fun. Indira Varma-Claxon, she's fabulous. One of our finest. The BBC costume drama / sci-fi interface, my favourite mix of a Who story, as I adore the futuristic cavorting in a period setting. And a lovely, subtly signposted plot switcheroo, Chekhov's earrings at the end, leaving the Doctor with an agonising moral dilemma that gets to the core of the paradoxes that beset the central character's attitudes to individual life and vanquishing the bad guys. And yet, there was a part of Rogue that I didn't like. I really didn't like. And so, as I've had to bat off suggestions recently that I've contorted these tortuous monologues in order to only say nice things, I'm going to use this one to examine how one deals with Doctor Who when one doesn't like an aspect of it. Not to cast aspersions on Rogue in particular, but to consider why and how we dislike things, and how we process the feelings and ideas that that dislike provokes. I love Doctor Who. You could say I was a true fan if you wanted to use parlance that I refuse to recognise. Oh, only a true fan would this, we true fans that. How can people call themselves true fans when the other? Sigh. If someone thinks they're a Doctor Who fan, then they are a Doctor Who fan. They don't have to pass some purity test written by you and me. Why do you care how anyone else enjoys the show? That's their business. But anyway, being a Doctor Who fan, to say it like the kids do, is very much my lived experience. And yet, I've spent a lot of my life being cross with, disappointed by, or angry at Doctor Who, in the way that I was with this already alluded to aspect of Rogue. So, let me re-emphasise, I am not singling this episode out for particular punishment. I'm just deliberately doing the opposite of what I usually do in these podcasts. I'm honing in on the bits that niggled me, in order to make Rogue the vessel with which to explore why we can be so frequently unhappy with this thing that we love. But, you know, I could do this with practically any story. Even the Caves of Androzani has a rubbish monster in it. In fact, when I was young and angry and paranoid, watching Doctor Who the first time around, I fretted about any new theme, title sequence, Doctor, worried that my show was changing. I don't think I enjoyed that feeling, which came from, I suspect, insecurity. Previously, on Toby Haydock's Time Travels, his dad had left when he was young, and his mum had little remaining within her emotional resources as she struggled to keep the family afloat, leading to the young Haydock having abandonment issues and a difficulty processing his feelings, which some would argue he hasn't shaken off to this day. Did we mention he's a recovering alcoholic? No? Well, this may come in useful later. For now, let's just sit him in the corner under a sign saying, Chekhov's alcoholic. He is relevant to this whole broadcast, though, lest you think I'm being uncharacteristically circumspect with my approach to disliking things. I was, I'll admit it, quite an angry young man, dealing with life's disappointments with pent-up fury, which would sometimes manifest itself as dyspepsia about my beloved show not doing what I wanted it to, or later, not being on the telly anymore and being unjustly mocked by an ignorant media. I used to deal with the world by yelling at it, seeing life as a battle. There's a righteousness, isn't there, about fighting? But whilst angry young men might have a certain, and I increasingly think, misjudged allure, angry older men, well, they really don't. The art does not lie in their being here. So, nowadays, I try to battle my midlife crisis and alcoholism, not with rage, but by taking a step back and trying to understand the feelings that vex me so. And, lest this sound a trifle too navel-gazing, I'm sorry, bear in mind I'm an underachieving middle-aged lush with little hair left and geeky tendencies. Navel-gazing? You're lucky I'm not describing a view of the entire Admiralty in unnecessarily turgid detail. But I get how easy it is to vent frustration in order to process the things that seem wrong to us. I remember the first time I felt the perverse joy of discovering how it felt to be very cross indeed with the programme that I love. And it was invigorating. I happened upon a magazine called DWB, and I suddenly had an explanation for my feelings of uncertainty about the modern incarnation of Doctor Who. And it gave a name to my hatred. JNT must go now, it yelled, blaming the show's current producer, John Nathan Turner, JNT, for the fact that the series wasn't how I imagined it to have been in the classic years of yore. I'd never actually seen the old days, but I knew it wasn't as good as it used to be. Good God, I suddenly felt alive. Not only was Doctor Who something I loved and enjoyed and researched, it could now be something I could be furious about too. Something I could use to reflect how I felt about my life and the world around me. This isn't unique to me, though, is it? We all do it. We always read 1-star reviews, as well as the 5 stars. We're not monsters, but we're always drawn to a drubbing. I don't want to read if someone quite liked something. If they loved it, sure, I'll see what they're raving about. But if they hated it, oh, I'm absolutely there. There's a reason people queued around the block to see Peter O'Toole's famously disastrous Macbeth. And of course, when we don't like something, we need a villain, and John Nathan Turner was the 80s devil incarnate. Nathan Turner wasn't entirely blameless in all of this, of course. He courted the fans and he made some dubious decisions. He even said of himself that when asked what he would do were he to become the producer of Bergerac, a programme set on the island of Jersey and focusing on the character of Jim Bergerac, played by John Nettles, he said he'd relocate it from Jersey and get rid of John Nettles. That anecdote seemed to typify JNT. Make some headlines, but completely miss the point of what the people who like the show watch it for. Oh, but there's nothing like having someone to focus our anger on, is there, if we don't like something? And JNT certainly found himself in the sights of many fans, just in case anyone out there listening thinks discursive toxicity was only born when Twitter was invented. We all have our own ideas of what is and is not a perversion of the show's core principles, and what we think are dubious motivations or personality traits of their perpetrators. This is why I'm amused when people bandy around the "I don't think," insert name of person they disagree with here, understands the true message of Doctor Who. I think we create Doctor Who in our own image. Doctor Who's true message is, as Terence Dicks often said, to stop them from having to broadcast the test card on a Saturday evening. Anything else, we graft onto it to justify the fact that we still watch a kids' show. How do we say, for example, what is objectively good Doctor Who? The Caves of Androzani, that I mentioned before, is an acknowledged classic, one of my favourites, a poll-topper extraordinaire. But I totally get those who say that it's perhaps a bit too dour for the zany fantasy show that they see Doctor Who as. Plus, Doctor Who means different things to us depending on when and where we were exposed to it. It's such a personal experience, it's hard to say what is actually good and bad. But if you did think The Twin Dilemma was better made television drama than The Caves of Androzani, well then I'm very happy for you, but I'd never let you operate heavy machinery in my presence, prepare any of my food, or look after my children. But let's leave aside our preferences, which are based on whether we think a story is exciting or well made. What about those adventures we embrace or reject in terms of the impact they have on our view of the show as a whole? For example, I think of the Doctor as someone who doesn't take life, even though we see him quite casually disintegrate an Ogron in Day of the Daleks, make a joke after graphically poisoning Shockeye with his bare hands in The Two Doctors, and try to brain a caveman in the very first story. Yet I think of those occasions as wrong, as decisions made by the makers, as errors that I choose to ignore. There's a need for a certain amount of denial, of cognitive dissonance, from all of us in order that we make Doctor Who the show we want it to be. We all have our own headcanon, the things we ignore lest they damage our view of what the show is. And sometimes we find ourselves going through extreme manoeuvres just to justify why we do or don't like something. I never fail to be impressed with the online commentators who, on a weekly basis at the moment, tie themselves in knots in order to hate the very latest instalment of Doctor Who, despite still watching it every week, and ascribe the very worst motives to its creators. RTD must go now. And, I don't think they're lying. They obviously do hate it, but they're not, to me, making a watertight or convincing case because, well, I don't share their views. But, they don't have to convince me. And to be honest, I can't say why I don't particularly like, say, aubergines. I just don't. But that doesn't mean they're objectively a worse vegetable than a cauliflower. Oh, but hang on. The Twin Dilemma is definitely worse than The Caves of Androzani. I mean, look at it. It's objectively worse. Isn't it? Oh, it's hard, this. So to Rogue, and what I didn't like. Well, funny enough, I don't do cosplay, but the cosplay element of Rogue wasn't my objection to it. Gosh, though, it's all hitting a bit close to home at the moment, isn't it? We've had internet bubbles last week, cosplay this week. Presumably next week there'll be an adventure about someone trying to take over the world with AI reconstructions of lost television episodes, or something. Of all the various elements of fandom, though, cosplay weirdly doesn't appeal to me at all. I just don't get it. I would definitely rule myself out of being a cosplayer. The appeal of it baffles me, and I'm sure the same way that some people wouldn't understand why I'd be really excited to discover what happened to an actor who appeared in one episode in 1965 who we've never managed to track down before. We all have our hill to die on. Or, in this case, our hill to dress up as the Taran Woodbeast on. I say this, and yet I did knit myself a Doctor Who scarf when I was a teenager who was always rubbish at girls and needed something to do in order to keep the clouds away. I wore it every now and again too, but I certainly didn't wear it with a facsimile Tom Baker costume. I mean, that would have been sad. No, it was a subtle, 13 foot long and multicoloured, but subtle indication that I, kind of like Doctor Who. Well, and now, I'm an actor. One of my favourite bits about my job is getting into costume, somebody else's shoes. I love that. I'm happiest when being someone else. I love creating a character so different from me. I feel alive and uninhibited. I have license to think and feel and behave in a manner that I'd feel shy about in real life. I've always been more comfortable in someone else's skin. I get psoriasis, so yeah, literally. And yet, I do find cosplay totally puzzling. But that said, I see people mocking it, and that puzzles me too. Doctor Who magazine ran features on it, and friends of mine were aghast. I thought, why? It's a legitimate part of fandom. It's just one that I don't do. We're in a bit of a glass house, Doctor Who fans. We're grown-ups obsessed with a kids' show about space and stuff. And yes, I know, drama department, etc., but it's still made for kids to watch. Kids send drawings of it to Blue Peter. They don't do that with Boys from the Black Stuff or The Wire. And I know dressing up is kind of for kids too, but so what? It doesn't harm anyone. It's an expression of creativity. It takes endeavour. I love endeavour. It's people inspired by the show, making costumes, sourcing materials, doing all sorts of clever things, and then, in their time out from school or work or chores or life, living those other experiences, if only for a weekend, in someone else's shoes, or casters, or latex hairy claw feet. So, whilst I know cosplay isn't for me, I totally get why it might be for other people. And this is an important element of dislike. Going back to the true fan thing, this idea that you can only like Doctor Who in a certain way is oddly prescriptive for a show that can famously be about almost anything. Just like I don't really like the work of comedian Lee Evans off of Planet of the Dead. His stand-up is just a bit too full-on for my taste. I can admire the skill and the craft that goes into it. I despair when someone who doesn't like a comedian issues a dismissive, "Oh, they're rubbish," the tiresome so-called comedian put-down, or whatever. I don't think Lee Evans is rubbish, even though he doesn't particularly make me laugh. I think he's brilliant, an astonishingly skilled performer who has great energy and obviously bags of talent. It's just not for me. Back to aubergines. I'm not wild about them, but I'm not going to deny that they're a vegetable. So-called vegetable. So no, it wasn't the cosplay bit that I didn't like in Rogue, though I did find it a little bit on the nose. Well, all right, beak. I felt the same about the Bridgerton element. I'd thought that was going to be evoked, not directly referenced as an actual motive for the aliens. I found that a tad parochial for our timeless show, as quickly dated as if a Tom Baker story had based itself around the mass appeal of To the Manor Born, or Patrick Troughton found himself under siege in the boardroom of the Power Game. But no. That slightly niggled me, but no more so than, say, the disappearing tape in The Ambassadors of Death, the fact the Primords look like ZZ Top in Inferno, or the clams in Genesis of the Daleks. All minor niggles in stories I still consider to be among the very best. So, it wasn't the cosplay, nor was it the overt invocation of Bridgerton. The thing I really struggle with in Rogue is the kiss. And no, and it's a sign of the times that I need to do this, but fair enough. It's not because it's a same-sex kiss, nor is it because it's a kiss between a person of colour and a Caucasian person. It would be easy, wouldn't it, to dismiss my dislike of the kiss because I'm an old dinosaur who is racist and homophobic. And indeed, sadly, I've seen plenty of racist and homophobic comments about the latest series of Doctor Who, so I totally understand people being on the lookout for them. But listen, I am an old dinosaur, but I am neither racist nor am I homophobic. I don't object to the kiss because of who the Doctor is kissing. I object to the kiss because the Doctor is doing any kissing at all. "You're a beautiful woman, probably," wonderfully sums up the Doctor to me. He just doesn't get or do this stuff, as his mind and I are on other things. In the whole of the classic series, romance between the Doctor and someone only happened once, in The Aztecs, a story in which, by the way, the Doctor gets called an old rogue. And it manages to be a romance that is sweet and funny and desperately sad, without the Doctor actually doing any of the romancing at all. His courtship with the Aztec lady Kameka happens by accident and is there for comic relief, until he uses it to get her to, unwittingly, help him to escape, and in the process, he breaks her heart. The emotions and consequences are artfully disseminated in the story, played beautifully, and they do complicated things. And in the end, the Doctor, as in Rogue, pockets a keepsake. But in the Aztecs, it's almost more touching, because it shows that, after all, he did care. That beneath that impenetrable exterior, there's something we rarely glimpse because, well, we don't know. And that is what is sad and mysterious. And so, of course, I objected to the kiss in the Doctor Who TV movie, because it was a kiss, and that was between a man and a woman, who were both white. I'm still not a fan of it, although I do kind of excuse it as an innocent expression of joy rather than anything actually sexy. And I really like the TV movie. So many lovely moments and nods, and it's well made. But the kiss is not the only bit I have major reservations about. In fact, I've enough mental gunpowder to fire both the kiss and the half-human guff out of my headcanon and into oblivion. All right, then what about the parting of the ways? Oh, I love the parting of the ways, because of the machine gun battles and the scary Daleks and the Doctor's moral dilemma and Rose and Jackie and Mickey getting her back to save the day. The kiss, I thought that was a sop to people who like that sort of thing. Fair enough. And I realised just this week how much of a true Doctor Who fan I am when I said out loud in a room full of people, no, actually, it wasn't a snog in Parting of the Ways. I think you'll find it was the Doctor sucking the time vortex out of Rose Tyler so that she wasn't vaporised, actually. So, whilst it looked like a kiss, it wasn't really a kiss. And so, I was kind of fine with it. And in fact, the show has often toyed with that. The makers of the modern programme know that the Doctor kissing is controversial, and not daft. The Doctor apparently kissing Rose in New Earth and Donna in The Unicorn and the Wasp were both used in trailers to get tongues wagging, but the gag, both times, was that of course neither counted as a real kiss because of course that's not what the Doctor does. They were both teases, there to annoy, intrigue, get us worked up, only to ultimately reassure us when the lip-smacking happened that it actually wasn't of the romantic variety. Back to the Parting of the Ways, though, and there's a same-sex kiss that I thought was bloody super. I loved Captain Jack kissing the Doctor and Rose in exactly the same way. That was Doctor Who doing what it does so brilliantly. Unostentatiously going, see, in the future, loads of things we have hang-ups about in the silly 21st century just won't be a problem. And the fact it was Jack, not the Doctor, doing it was key to it being, I thought, rather gorgeously groundbreaking. No one could argue with brave, brilliant, funny Captain Jack cutting through our pathetic, limited 2005 shortcomings in such a joyous way. And hey, look, I can do soppy too. I liked the Doctor being cut off just before he could tell Rose he loved her as they were rent asunder on Bad Wolf Bay. But I'd have hated it if the renting had occurred 5 seconds later and given him time to say it prior to his being asundered. Why? Well, this is what I've been asking myself throughout writing this. I'm not really attempting to justify my opinion. I don't have to justify anything. Remember, people can not like something and not be bad. And they can also just be wrong. Remember that? Oh, those far-off days when people just went, oh, I don't agree with them, they're wrong, and then just got on with their day. Oh, I loved those times. Yeah, I loved them, but I'm not going to kiss them, though. That'd ruin everything. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we go to great lengths to justify why we do or don't like things, don't we? As if our taste is somehow linked to virtue or correctness. Yeah, and you see, I'm not sure about that. You think I'm wrong to like season 17, do you? Ah, are you kink-shaming me now? I mean, I'm being glib, but today's culture wars do seem to involve a lot of, you like New Who, you're a woke snowflake. You dislike it, you're a racist bigot. But the fact is, I'm very much enjoying the latest series of Doctor Who, and I am not a woke snowflake. But I didn't like the kiss at all, and neither am I a homophobic bigot. I just really don't like kissing in Doctor Who. I don't really care for romance in the show at all, but especially not from the lead character. Yeah, okay, having Greg Sutton and Petra Williams fall in love, or Frank Harris be extra worried about Maggie because she's his wife, gives a little extra edge to their interactions, but not a massive amount. I'm as moved, if I'm honest, by the dynamic between Orsini and Bostock in Revelation of the Daleks as I am by either of those more traditional, explicitly romantic bondings. And for me, growing up, you see, Doctor Who was practically the only programme that didn't bother with all of that relationship stuff. If I wanted to watch something with snogging in, I could tune in to practically anything else. Even Blake Seven had snogging. And now, even these days, if a modern drama gets bogged down with one of the leads struggling to get a babysitter whilst they solve a murky conspiracy, or has to try to rekindle their dreary marriage whilst uncovering a murder, I want them away from the domestic and back to the thriller as soon as possible. I watched for the conspiracy and the murder, the stuff I don't get at home, not the sodding baby or the bleeding divorce. I've no need to live through all that stuff again. That's what I go to TV for. the thrill and excitement from experiences that you don't get in everyday life. And it's certainly what I go to a science fiction adventure series for. Now, romance can sometimes help with tensions or character dynamics, sure, but more so when it's promised, suggested, hinted. For consummation? Well, that's only fun if you're there. The unsaid is usually 100 times more moving than the seen and done. I ducked out of Frasier once Niles snagged Daphne. Moonlighting jumped the shark when David and Maddie got together. And the whole point of the X-Files was surely that Mulder and Scully wouldn't get it on because this isn't that kind of show, and how bloody refreshing is that? I know Doctor Who has a flexible format, and I'm the first to laugh at fans who hit the roof when that format is flexed. But surely the flexing to be done is in making it do what other dramas can't do. Doctor Who with a Bridgerton twist shouldn't be making Doctor Who like Bridgerton. It should be making Bridgerton like Doctor Who. Costume drama with aliens, not aliens with snogging. I just don't understand the need to revolutionise Doctor Who by making it just like everything else out there. For balance, though, my partner, a Bridgerton fan, loved Rogue. "Well, it's about time the Doctor kissed," she said. "Why?" I said. "Well, because he's not done it before," she said. She hasn't seen all of it, okay. "And I love Bridgerton too. It's my favourite programme," she said. "Oh, well, that's okay then," I said. "I look forward to watching Bridgerton with you next season when they have aliens in it. After all, they've not done that before." "Well, no," she said, "because then it wouldn't be my favourite programme anymore." Well, indeed. Now, I'm being slightly glib, of course. I'm cosplaying my disappointment with the livery of humour. But, of course, I have noticed in some of the social media fallout that a lot of the voices who haven't liked Rogue have been the usual bigots, and those in support have been people who found themselves hitherto underrepresented, feeling seen. And at the end of the day, that is more important than the instincts of a 50-year-old bloke who's never really had to worry about people looking and sounding like him in Doctor Who, or indeed UK TV in general. And this week has hit home to me that I live in my own kind of bubble. Whilst I have had perfectly civil conversations with my friends, gay and straight, on both sides of the argument about the kissing aspect of Rogue that's perturbed me so, some of what I've read online, trotting out the kind of prejudicial nonsense about homosexuality that I thought 21st century civilised beings had put well behind them, was depressingly instructive, and ironically gives, I'm sure, gay creatives more impetus to put positive depictions of their sexuality in their work as a celebratory riposte to such cruel unkindness. I get that, and I'm always happy if Doctor Who does good, but it doesn't mean I'm going to enjoy it when it does so. I can acknowledge that aubergines are high in fibre and full of antioxidants, and so are extremely good for people, especially diabetics, but that doesn't mean I'm automatically going to find experiencing them pleasurable myself. And me not liking them doesn't make me a bad man, nor does it make me someone who doesn't want aubergines on my television, or indeed on my plate. I mean, I'll eat them if they're put in front of me. It'd be rude not to. I guess I'm just sad. And I am a bit sad. Sorry, we alcoholics have to admit to our feelings these days, and it would be extremely prejudiced of you to deny me this representation. I'm still that sad little kid who's now a 50-year-old man with an accumulation of regrets behind him and a stupid bald head. And I'm sad for the kids who might feel like I did. Those who didn't have the self-confidence to flirt across a crowded room, to express how they felt romantically, who were never that fancy-looking or fancy-feeling, those who've never been able to dance in public. And that there's not a drama show for them in which getting a snog isn't actually that important, where excitement and invention can happen without a reminder that the real world pressures us into being people who are successful in all matters romantic or carnal. As we rightly look at increasing representation of LGBTQ+ people, well, what's wrong with having an asexual character as an aspirational hero? Someone who isn't judged because of their ability or willingness to be sexy. To me, it diminishes the character to try to make the Doctor prey to the same human emotions as us. I've never bought this idea that we, any of us, need to identify explicitly with the Doctor. I've never had the audacity to identify with the Doctor, even when he was an ostensibly straight white male. I aspired to be like the Doctor, clever, funny, brave, but not because he looked and sounded like me, but because he was an ideal, more than human. This, I note with interest, compares differently with today, where we expect to identify with our heroes. We want our heroes to be like us, to reflect us. I didn't want Doctor Who to be like me. I hated me. I was too full of self-loathing to expect to identify with the magnificent Doctor. It would ruin Doctor Who if he was like me. No, I needed to try to make myself like Doctor Who. He was aspirational, not reassuring. The companions were the identification figures. They were the ones who were like us, but who were made better by their exposure to the Doctor, braver, with expanded horizons, taught to appreciate that there are more exciting things out there than the limits of human imagination and experience. And yes, exposure to humans might soften the Doctor, and the Doctor might get a new perspective because of us, but I find it baffling that we should see the programme's job to be teaching the Doctor to be better because aren't we humans wonderful? I find that a ghastly notion. It'd be like saying to Jesus, yeah, all right, mate, with all your wisdom and metaphors and miracles and teachings, I think you'll find that we've got Doritos and twerking. Oh, and this racy period drama that was big in the early 2020s. My feeling is that we should have our minds opened to bigger and better ideas and places and thoughts because of the Doctor, who isn't bogged down by any of our silly human preoccupations and parochialism of time or geography. And perhaps part of the price the Doctor pays for being able to see and experience and demonstrate this stuff is to not have the time and space for love and kisses. That, to me, that denial, that inability to experience something fundamental to us as human beings, is more moving than a random encounter with a space hottie. And it gives comfort to those who, for whatever reason, don't get to experience much romance. And of course, I'm aware that this reading of mine makes me willfully ignore something established in the very first episode of Doctor Who, that he's a grandfather. But I long ago rationalised myself to the fact that the whole grandfather thing was some kind of subterfuge and is not meant literally, even though there is absolutely nothing on screen to justify this reading at all. It's headcanon. As I say, I've come up with all sorts of reasons to justify my very firmly held vision of the show, but it's like any religion. It's contradictory, unprovable, and I'm cherry-picking the bits I like. And yeah, I am probably a bit of a dinosaur, but I'm hopefully one of those nice, slow-moving ones that chews on leaves. I have to be honest and acknowledge the prejudices that I certainly do have. Reading exchanges full of grown-up people with jobs, chatting about shipping this and stanning that, it does come across to me as a bit childish. I mean, childish discourse about Doctor Who? Ha! Anyone would think it was for kids. But maybe it's a sign that if I'm not careful, I'll be left behind. And if Doctor Who teaches us anything, well, it's that we have to learn to move with the times. And it should be there for you when you're young. The old can take care of themselves. And you know, as a genuine liberal, I'm pleased that we now have some same-sex attraction exhibited by the main character, because, after all, the teeming reservoir of heteronormativity that is Doctor Who fandom might now finally open its floodgates to the gay community, who've been hitherto conspicuous by their absence in fan waters. That's been the problem with Doctor Who up to now. Such a turn-off for gay viewers. Oh, you can't move for straights at Doctor Who conventions. You can't hear yourself discuss which delegate is Bayus or the unit dating conundrum or whether JNT should have gone then over the din of orthosexual badinage. It's not surprising, as there's never been a hint of campness about the show or its followers. Well, no more. Now, I'm being naughty, of course, but there is a serious point here. If a character like the Doctor is enigmatic, then you can find representation there because there are multifaceted readings of him or her. In my experience, the show attracts, as its acolytes, creative, individual people who maybe aren't orthodox, nor especially socially robust, or people who need a bit of an identification figure. If that figure never really fixates on their romantic inclinations and is indeed a bit of a mystery, Doctor Who, after all, then a broader spectrum of people is likely to identify and to feel represented. And it isn't that I don't want emotion in Doctor Who. I think, as with humour that isn't too full on, I'm more drawn to the stoical expressions of it. John Pertwee putting on a brave face at Joe's engagement party before sadly driving into the sunset. Till we meet again, Sarah Jane. Silly old fusspots. They get me much more than the outbreaks of lachrymosity of today's more demonstratively emotional world. The Doctor doesn't show those human emotions in the same way that the programme doesn't have swearing in it, extreme violence, or even lots of money. It means you have to engage your imagination and tell stories in a different way, which is part of what makes Doctor Who unique. And yet, much as I admire stoicism and try and practice it, it seems brave, doesn't it? I'm not sure it's really that healthy. I'm not sure deep down that it actually is. Did I mention I'm an alcoholic? Ah, Mr. Chekhov, thank you so much for introducing that sad drunk in Act 1. We knew he was there for a reason. Presumably he's now about to go off. Well, listen, as an alcoholic, I go to meetings every week to say stuff out loud. And of course I know, therefore, that emotions are better out than in, not bottled up, in order that we properly deal with them. That's healthier. Stoicism, that I so admire, because it's what we used to do back in my day, is perhaps its own form of cosplay, putting on a brave face in order to hide your real feelings. It turns out, instead of festering unsaid, when you enunciate the things that bother you, they can actually seem silly and trivial and ridiculous out loud. And I'm sure as time ticks on, I'll remember and enjoy the bits I love about Rogue. The spaceship reveal, Bird Beckett's bent beak, the Kylie sequence. Although that bit does mean I now imagine the Doctor saying, don't you look a bit like Kylie when he meets Astrid Peth in Voyage of the Damned, because she can't exist in-universe and play a character. I just can't get you out of my headcanon now. Bergerac's coming back too, courtesy of school reunion writer Toby Whithouse. I'm sure he didn't get the job by saying, yeah, let's set it outside Jersey and not have Bergerac in it, the J&T manoeuvre. And that's where I'm stuck with Rogue's raison d'etre right now. I wouldn't use Columbo to tell a story about a tidy detective whose wife you see all the time, or Miss Marple to highlight the hitherto ignored really good at football side of her character, or indeed Bridgerton to tell a story about alien invasion. Yeah, my other half can keep watching. And I'm not sure Bridgerton viewers would thank me if I did. But it's still all me just desperately trying to justify why I simply don't like a bit of a thing. You can intellectualise it all you like. It's mostly just down to taste, isn't it? It's that old aubergine again. Actually, it's a good job Rogue didn't have a mobile phone. The Doctor might have sent a text message with an aubergine in it, just to infuriate me doubly. So, I haven't reached a conclusion, really. I've basically spent a heck of a lot of your time saying, I don't like this bit. But I suppose the important point to make is that there's a lot of ground between woke snowflake and homophobic bigot, and I'd hope that most of us can see that despite the different things that we like about this show, most of us are at neither extreme, and that we can all like the same show whilst enjoying, and not enjoying, different things about it. It's when we start attaching value judgments to matters of taste and start attacking the people who make the show and questioning their motives that we start being mean to each other. Again, let's take out of the equation people who have been explicitly racist or homophobic. Screw them, with a particularly bulbous aubergine. And look, I hated the kiss in the TV movie, But it didn't have the seismic effect it looked like it was going to have. It didn't ruin Doctor Who for me or anyone else. And all these years later, to be honest, it barely even registers with me. And unlike that kiss, this one, between the Doctor and Rogue, well, it may have done some good somewhere to some sad little boy or girl, and they might grow up as a slightly better balanced, slightly happier adult than the one that you're listening to now. And maybe they won't turn to the bottle because they've actually found what they were looking for in Doctor Who. And I can embrace that. Embrace it, yes, but no kissing. And look, I didn't even mention Richard E. Grant. That didn't really bother me, to be honest. I can ignore it or rationalise it as when the great intelligence pretended to be the Doctor or whatever. But I can guarantee you that someone, somewhere, is absolutely furious about it. You know, a true fan. Thanks for listening to Indefinable Magic. Tonight's episode, you've had this place redecorated, which I nearly called Kiss Kiss Warp Warp and then didn't, because that would have been a spoiler. After Rogue was written and presented by me, Toby Haydock. The podcast artwork is by Dylan Patterson, and the music was specially composed by Dominic Glynn. I'm grateful to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Graham Cluley, Joel Aarons, Joanne Abbott, Keith Adams, Mark Aldridge, Kit Allen, Neil Allen, Sebastian April, Tilt Ariza, Reddit Aritza, Endaf Arwin, Simon Ash, Richard Alt, John Babb, P. Baker, Richard Baker, John Ball, Stephen Bamford, Simon Barker, Ollie Barrett, Andy Benison, Richard Bignell, Peter Blackett, Robin Bland, Gareth Bowley, David Brody, Hugh Buchtman, Tim Burrows, Rebecca Burgess, DC, Jim Cameron, Paul Carrington, Anthony Carroll, Damien Cartin, Phil Chapman, Ralph Chilton, Susan Christian, Steve Churchill, and Kevin Clark. If you would like your name read out on the credits, that is one of the bonuses of being a patron, go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month you get bonus releases, advance material, and all sorts of other goodies. You get a 10% discount if you sign up for a year in advance. I'm also on kofi.com/Toby Haydock if you'd like a different way of doing it. Or you can do something that costs you nothing, which is to go to Patreon, Podbean, Spotify, anywhere online and give these 5 stars and a few lines of review to lure people into the spider's web of Toby Haydock's Time Travels, this podcast series. I'm on all the social medias, Twitter @Haydock Podcasts and @Toby Haydock, and on Instagram @Toby.Haydock, and I have a Facebook page as well, and a website, www.tobyhaydock.com. These are supposed to be short. This one isn't. I'm stopping now. But thanks for listening.